Hi, Bill Kristol here. Welcome to Bulwark on Sunday. Very pleased to be joined again by Tom Joscelyn, my old friend and colleague and investigator of so many different things. But you and I have been somewhat obsessed with the the Epstein scandal and the Trump connection to the Epstein scandal, both the crimes and the cover-up, I'd say. Obviously, cover-up, he's the president. So I thought we would help people out I think we can help people out, honestly, by just discussing it today and try to put it into context and trying to explain what I think we both agree is a genuine scandal, but I don't want to speak for you ahead of time. So anyway, Tom, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate it.
And
I mean,
so Tom,
I'm struggling to smile here actually because we were talking about this earlier, and just the horrors of all this. When you get into, you're supposed to smile when you come on these videos and do these types of interviews, and
yeah,
just going through all the details. It's so disturbing and disgusting what actually transpired here that it just, I don't know. It should weigh on people more, I think.
I totally agree. And you sort of, one wants to be, obviously welcoming to people and so forth, and not walking around looking
right,
downtrodden for 24 hours. But it does should weigh on people. And you've looked into this in such depth and complexity. And you have a history of investigating things. I would just say you've been an investigator, not just
I'm intellectually curious, and
and then you've done it on foreign policy and domestic policy. Obviously, working for the January 6th committee and putting pieces together there. So let's put it in context. I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier, but it is a real scandal, isn't it?
It is. I think the starting point for me is what we were talking about earlier, which is that sunshine is often the best disinfectant, and sometimes it's the only disinfectant. Meaning it's the only thing that real transparency can lead to real accountability. And one of the things that strikes me throughout the course of my adult life is how many times there have been these sort of massive scandals involving sexual abuse, molestation, rape, all sorts of absolutely horrific sexual deviancies that have gone on too long without accountability from government investigators, from criminal accountability. And it often comes down to either a journalist or a handful of journalists prying into the story and saying there's more there, or victims pressing constantly over and over again to say, no, there needs to be some kind of accountability. And, as we talked earlier, Bill, there are a couple of prime examples that I thought of. One that everybody I think is still familiar with is the Larry Nassar case. He was this lead physician for the USA gymnastics, and he abused hundreds of girls over decades, hundreds. And what's shocking about it, and this is all going to tie into Epstein. What's shocking about it is there was all this evidence of what he was doing, and yet the FBI and DOJ really dropped the ball in terms of investigating it. And they dropped the ball, and it was so bad how they, such an egregious error on their part that they actually end up paying the victims $138.7 million just last year in restitution for not properly pursuing these leads. That's an example of how the government fails. We were talking about other failures like the Catholic Church cover-up of the massive molestation of boys and some girls over decades. I personally know or have known some victims of that awful crime. And that, again, came down to journalists and victims pushing for accountability, for there ultimately to be some kind of transparency into what happened. And I think the Epstein affair, the Epstein scandal, connects those others in that way, that's the commonality for my mind.
No, you're right. Until we talked about this earlier, just to be clear to people, it wasn't an earlier show that you missed. We just were talking on the phone. And, of course, I'm aware of these other scandals. And I, now that you say it, it sort of makes a certain amount of sense. It is striking how powerful people get away with things. And I think in that respect, the critique of the establishment, this was sort of the germ of truth, if you can put it this way. And what is dismissed everywhere in the press is what is correctly dismissed, including by us, as many crazy MAGA conspiracy theories. But it's not true that Epstein was a conspiracy theory, right? It was a horrific criminal enterprise.
There's a real conspiracy when it comes to the Epstein matter. That's the point. It's not a conspiracy theory when you have so many established facts. I mean, people can take it into conspiracy theory land by asserting things we don't know or aren't in evidence and things that are wild accusations. But to your point, we now have many examples over the last 2 decades, even, of powerful men using their position of power to abuse minors, to abuse young women, to abuse women, and abuse others. I was even thinking of this, just one other example before we focus on Epstein. I mean, Dennis Hastert, he was the Republican Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2007 and was accused of molesting, I think, 4 boys. This was a Speaker of the House, not somebody who's a junior member. And so we have all sorts of examples of this now throughout our modern history here. And I think I think part of this going forward is there needs to be a real thinking through a way for real accountability and to really investigate these matters in a way that matters for victims and brings real justice.
And I think if I could this is a bit of a sidebar, but I think it is, the media needs to say that these are crimes. I mean, report this as what we know. I mean, Epstein was convicted, slap on the wrist, but still pled guilty to one set of crimes, was indicted for about 3 more serious crimes after Julie Brown did all of her reporting. Maxwell obviously convicted and indicted and convicted. And they still reported about it as if, MAGA world thinks there was a network of influential people. Like the Times had a version of this. I'm not quoting it quite correctly, but people could look it up in their Thursday article, which was otherwise a kind of useful TikTok in the sense of what the administration has done on the cover-up side. But it was and this has been very politically damaging. This MAGA world has long believed in a conspiracy of powerful men, that Epstein was at the center of a conspiracy of powerful men, something like that. He wasn't. That's not a belief of MAGA world.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. I mean,
right. Yeah. I mean, it's a total fact, especially when you get into the details of what Epstein did to prevent himself from being held accountable, right? I mean, you talk about the power and influence he wielded in order to get a sweetheart plea deal originally and to harass his victims and go after people and intimidate media into not reporting on what they were learning about him. I mean, he's sort of the prototype of a rich, powerful man using his influence and power to his wealth to tilt the playing field against his victims and keep himself going and keep his conspiracy going.
And Maxwell was a full-on co-conspirator. I mean, and quite important. I mean, not quite, very important to the conspiracy, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, the whole idea that a senior Department of Justice official who worked as a private defense lawyer for Donald Trump will go meet with Ghislaine Maxwell in pursuit of truth is just strains credulity in all sorts of ways. It's just not believable. Ghislaine Maxwell, so people know this. She's been in prison now for a while. And for the last few years, she's been waging a PR campaign professing her innocence and trying to get her appeal heard and then trying to win an appeal. And then she's now ostensibly, quite openly, I would say, trying to get a pardon, And the evidence from the victims, the people who have testified about what she did in terms of setting up this recruiting network to help procure underage girls and delivering them to Jeffrey Epstein, participating in the actual sexual assaults and other matters.
And delivering them to many other people, of course. Epstein. She helped Epstein build this massive network who benefited from.
Yeah, she was a key ringleader in that network. She's a key person who helped him. A sexual predator of her own right, when you look at all the evidence that the victims have talked about her. And the other thing, Bill, I was struck, as I was preparing for today, one of the things that Ghislaine Maxwell has done as well is she has she's continuing to try to cover up for wealthy, powerful men, including Prince Andrew, her friend, who, with Virginia Giuffre, who was one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and committed suicide a few months ago, unfortunately. Prince Andrew entered into a $12 million settlement with Virginia Giuffre and one of the pieces of evidence there, a striking piece of evidence, is this photograph of Andrew taken with Virginia and with Ghislaine Maxwell, and the photos taken by Jeffrey Epstein in a townhouse in London. And one of the things that Ghislaine Maxwell has done is tried to proclaim and try to argue that she has some sort of super secret evidence that this photo, which went viral and is very easily found on the web now, is somehow fake, somehow fraudulent, or somehow a piece of planted evidence to set up Prince Andrew. So this is not somebody you would trust, implicitly going into a conversation with her. The Department of Justice shouldn't be, if they want accountability and truth, you're not going to Ghislaine Maxwell for it. You're going to go to the victims for it. You're going to actually accumulate all the evidence of who these victims are. We only know, by the way, publicly, really a small number of the overall number of victims. I mean, the estimate is over 1,000 victims over time. Think about how few of them we know. And we want to respect that. We don't want to know their actual names, but in my case, I don't. I just want to know the details and trying to put together crimes and hold people accountable. But just think about how little we actually know about all this. And the idea that she would be the starting point for the Department of Justice is just doesn't really make any sense if you're actually investigating, interested in investigating.
Yeah, if you're interested in investigating, you would go through the files, which it sounds like they did. You would find leads. You would find what I believe Bondi called to Trump. What was the phrase? Unverified, not hypotheticals, but unverified something, accusations or something against Trump. And then you would try to verify them or not, or falsify them. Right? Some of them could be wrong. It's not like there aren't thousands of pages of files compiled by the FBI doing their investigation. It might not have been quite the investigation they should have done, but to be fair, they might have done an awful lot that wasn't used by the prosecutors in 2006, 7, 8. And then later on too, because Epstein never came to trial, obviously, in 2019. And the Maxwell thing is they wanted to, once you're prosecuting the actual case, you go for your strongest 2 or 3 cases. You don't need to prove 40 cases. But from the point of view of transparency and accountability, you need to follow up on these. That's the way to follow up on the leads, not to close down the investigation. Okay, we looked through the files. They had done quite a lot of work. They'd redacted, it sounds like, names, as they should have, and they weren't going to put out child pornography, God knows, and so forth. They were kind of getting ready to release it, and then they told Trump he was in the files, and so the whole thing is not going to be released. Trump says, Trump's order, obviously, and now they're talking to Maxwell. It is really astonishing, I've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this, and I've talked to other mutual friends of ours. I'm for to understanding the truth, and wherever the truth may lead, that so be it. Let the chips fall where they may. If there are other powerful men, Democrats, Republicans, whoever, that are implicated in this or are suspected of doing something beyond just consorting with Jeffrey Epstein socially, in business, then I think there should be a real wholesome investigation in that. And it starts with transparency, public transparency. That's what these other previous stories we talked about started with, was really uncovering the stuff in public. But, by the same token, one of the things about Donald Trump and his involvement in all this is, there's a problem here. Even if no evidence of his criminal wrongdoing or any kind of anything like that comes about at any point in time, there's still a real problem here. There's a moral and ethical problem that I have, at least, and more people should have, with his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein spanning so many years. We're talking now.
Talk about that some. From was it 1987-ish? We think all the way through. It's unclear when it really got caught off. 2004, 2005, either because of this alleged real estate dispute, or because maybe Trump sensed that they were getting close to Epstein, and the investigation had begun at that point. Anyway, we're talking about a long time, 16, 17, 18 years.
Somewhere from the late 1980s to 2005-ish, right? And there's actually another piece of evidence we can talk about that. But, and it starts with, if you're really looking into this in terms of his relationship and why he's uncomfortable with it. We have the recent revelations that have come out, with the birthday card that he sent in 2003, and we'll get to that. And there's obviously the New York Magazine, quote that he has that's very damning, I would say, from a moral perspective, from 2002. But from the late 1980s onward, we just have so much evidence now of what was going on in the nature of the relationship. I mean, Michael Wolff, the journalist, has these recordings that he did with Jeffrey Epstein in 2017, and Michael Wolff is who he is, right? But one of the recordings,
they're real recordings.
They're real recordings. Yeah, I mean, I don't know any reason to dispute them. But in one of them, Jeffrey Epstein himself says something like, "I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years." Now, okay. By itself, you wouldn't take that at face value. You want to look at it, but it's a pretty interesting starting point. And just recently, Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, went on CNN and said, yeah, they were very close friends. And he used good friends, very close. These are the things he told on CNN. And he accused Trump of lying about the relationship and the nature of the relationship. Mark Epstein recounted, said stuff like that Trump was in Jeffrey Epstein's office, in the 1990s often. He was in there a lot, he said. And he recounted this story of where they were on a plane together, the 3 of them. And Jeffrey Epstein had this joke about Donald Trump, where he would joke to Donald and say, "Hey, Donald, why do you sleep with so many married women?" And Donald Trump would reply, "Because it's so wrong," or something like that, something along those lines. And apparently, and Mark Epstein says that tells you the intimacy between the two and the knowledge between the two, that Jeffrey Epstein would know that about him and would joke about it. And it's a joke that he repeated for Mark's own benefit. And so so you start building this up into, the sort of evidence we have. Just recently, the Bulwark had Stacey Williams on, who is one of the victims here, or one of the accusers of what's going on, not in terms of against Epstein, but in terms of what she's alleged against Donald Trump doing. And she dated, by her own testimony, she dated Jeffrey Epstein for a few months. You're talking the 1992, 1993 time frame. And she's described them as best friends at the time. She said that Epstein would talk about Donald all the time, and that, in fact, she was in Trump's office with Epstein and Trump groped her there, and that this was something they talked through. And she's described this publicly many times. And, I have a list of all this other evidence and we can break this up a little bit. But the point is, like, you start going back to late 1980s all the way through 2005. And there's just an awful lot of testimony now about, one, the closeness of the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. And two, it wasn't a business thing, right? This was a thing where they were sharing in the evidence, all points at them sharing in this pursuit of women at a minimum, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. And when Maxwell put together the book of the birthday book, the 50th birthday book for Epstein, Trump's in the category of friends. I think about 20 of them. And in his case, as his card suggests, and some of the other ones do too, incidentally, it's clearly let's call it the best case Playboy friends, assuming. But we now know that Epstein's version of this was underage girls and and grooming and trafficking them to other men. Maybe Trump wasn't part of that. He just was sort of thought of Epstein as another playboy chasing women. But he certainly is right next to this. He's very close to this guy. I mean, that's what's striking. Both Trump's effusive praise of Epstein, Epstein's effusive discussions of how close he is to Trump. They're winking and nodding about their common love for women, and in Epstein's case, Trump says on the young side that the card, the photos of them, and the video, and as you say, the many quite a few testimonies by now of women who were either victims or saw things. I mean, at the very least, Trump is part of that world of Epstein's. Let's put it that way. Right?
There are a lot of friends to be friends with in wealthy New York City, right? There's a lot of guys you could be friends with. Right. And he was friends with this guy for a long time, and it wasn't
friends in a certain way, I guess is one my way. Because one can imagine Epstein was a big shot business guy, and he's somewhat sleazy and disreputable. But one can imagine plenty of people having a business relationship with Epstein, meetings with Epstein, going to dinner at his house. I mean, whatever, and kind of. Maybe they should have known a little better, but kind of not wanting to know, but not being involved, not being, they could be happily married men or women, just he's sort of in their general social circle. That was not the case with Trump. I think it's really, they've not wanted to face up to this, honestly.
Well, that's the nature of the Stacey Williams testimony, right? Stacey Williams accuses Trump of groping her in front of Jeffrey Epstein, all the way back in the early 1990s. And then here's another piece of evidence. We start building up what actually the nature of the relationship is. Maria Farmer, who was one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and she went to the NYPD and the FBI all the way back in the mid 1990s with what she told them about, and told them that they should investigate Epstein and his network and even investigate Trump. And she has claimed that she was in Epstein's office and Trump came in there. She was 16 at the time, so clearly underage, and that Trump was like leering at her. This is what Maria Farmer alleges. And that Epstein said to Trump, no, she's not here for you. Okay, this is a 16-year-old at the time, and this is what she's saying happened. And
this is way before. This is 1996, if I'm not mistaken. And then
1996. I think 1995 is when this happens. 1996 is when there's some reporting.
She goes on her own, I think, to the law enforcement to say there's something. This is terrible. I think she repeats it again in the 2000s.
A decade later, yeah.
This is before Trump's running for office. It's before Trump's just another character in New York, so to speak. I mean, that's pretty strong testimony. It seems to me she has no interest in saying anything untrue about Trump, presumably, right?
Right. I mean, look, there's other witnesses too that don't go that far, but what they say shows you the nature of the relationship anyway. And that one of them is Jack O'Donnell, who was this big time executive. He was COO of Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino, and he worked from Trump, I think, from 1987, 1990. He came on CNN recently and described them as best friends during the period. And actually described them as best friends, not just a good friendship, but as best friends. And he recounted a story of where the commission, so in the gaming world, you can't have underage people on the, in the casino at certain places. You can't have them on the floor at certain places at certain times. Now, underage for casinos is under 21. It's not underage like minor for sex trafficking purposes. So there's a distinction here. But he recounted the story of where he had to let Trump have it because he was consorting with Jeffrey Epstein. They come in a helicopter at like 1:30 in the morning on a Sunday night with 3 young ladies in the helicopter, one of whom he knew to be, this guy Jack O'Donnell knew to be 19 because apparently she was the number 3 tennis player in the world at the time and knew her age. She was 19. And this raised the problem that they had to deal with because Trump was bringing these underage people into the casino and they had to deal with it. I can't imagine why Jack O'Donnell would be making that up or lying about it. But it shows you that the nature of, like, think about it. You know, coming in the middle of the night, Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein. We're not alleging minors here, but very young, young women. And that's who they're consorting with, and it creates an issue for them all the way back in the early 1990s, late 80s, whenever this actually transpired. So what I'm saying is, when you look through this, it isn't just a business relationship. It isn't just a golf buddy, right? It's not just, it's one of those relationships where you look at what Trump knows about what Epstein's doing and what Trump himself is doing, and it's all in this sexual realm.
And the card, with the birthday card, which is like such a weird thing that people kind of got a little distracted, honestly, by how weird it is to have this book of birthday cards that Maxwell assembled, how weird it is to have this drawing that Trump presumably did or certainly signed. And they kind of glossed over a bit, I think, the actual text of what Trump wrote or dictated, or in any case, if someone wrote it for him, I guess that's possible. Trump's sort of vaguely alleging this, but Trump signed it. I mean, we can't pretend this isn't, and Maxwell knew Trump well. It's not like Maxwell would have put something in that some rogue person sent in Trump's name. Maxwell would have, known that this was Trump's contribution to the book, just as Leon Black had something in the book, and many other people Trump hung out with, some of them, Epstein hung out with some of them, clearly in sexual contexts, because you see that from the nature of their contributions and what they've written. Others just, writing a nice note about some rich guy that they know maybe as a golf partner or as a business associate. But Trump is one of the friends, and he signs this note that he presumably wrote or dictated or thought was funny. And that note is sick. I mean, I just don't see how you read it and don't think that Trump minimally knew what Epstein was doing and conceivably was part of what Epstein was doing.
I mean, the note as described is sick, and there's a couple things about it. One, obviously the signature, as has been reported, is where a woman's pubic hair would be. So he wrote Donald where a woman's pubic hair, according to the reporting on this. I mean, that's sick in and of itself, right? On a new drawing of a woman. And, the actual contents of the message referencing a secret and an enigma, these types of things. I mean, again, it takes it way out of the context of, like,
they never get old. The enigmas who never
age. Yeah, never age. Yeah, you're getting way out of the context of golfing buddy or business world stuff into an entirely different context. In addition to that, I mentioned this earlier. This is what struck me about the fact that Beauvais from the DOJ, or I'm sorry, not Todd Blanche from the DOJ, went down to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida. What struck me about it, because what she was doing with Prince Albert and trying to explain away this damning evidence against Prince Albert, that struck me as something to be worried about here, right? Ghislaine Maxwell's who put together this birthday book for Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday. The card that's attributed to Trump is one of the cards that's in there, from one of the 20 friends. She certainly knows the provenance of that and everything else. And one of the victim's attorneys has come out to say that he knows several victims who can attest to the authenticity of it all. But I worried when I was thinking about this, the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell has already been trying to explain away other evidence, damning evidence against rich and powerful men. Now, in a different, there's nothing, Prince Andrew, there were very specific allegations regarding his behavior here that have not been levied against Trump so far in the Epstein world, with the exception of the Stacey Williams accusation, which is groping. But the bottom line is that I got very worried that Ghislaine Maxwell could be used for that purpose, right? That she could be used to try and explain away the card in some way and make light of it, or sort of lessen the impact of it. And that's one of the things I'd be worried about,
Yeah, they could use Maxwell in all kinds of ways to try to soften the evidence or shape it or call into question. I mean, she puts together a book. She presumably cared that her co-conspirator and lover, I guess, if that's the right word, but I don't know that's a word you could use about Epstein or whatever, partner in crime, he would want an actual card from Trump, one of his best friends, as they both said, and the idea that she would put in something that was not legit seems kind of crazy. But I suppose, if she says it now, that'll give enough. Maybe that's enough smoke to kind of confuse matters. I agree. I mean, it's interesting that Trump sort of took the same line, right? It's fake. I mean, so Trump took the line about the birthday note that Maxwell had taken about the Prince Andrew photograph.
That's what I'm saying. That's why you could start to see that that's the play, right? And then Maxwell's only showing a willingness to do that on behalf of rich, powerful men who she is friends with. And that was with Prince Andrew, who can't pardon her.
Yes, I'd say this is a rich, powerful man who could commute the sentence, pardon or promise, dangle a pardon for after the 26 elections or after the 28 elections or whatever, right? I mean, no, it's so bad. One thing that strikes me at the cover up is that they tell Trump he's in the files. Hard to believe you didn't know that, but anyway, we don't know how much detail they told him at this meeting. One meeting, according to the reporting, they didn't go into much detail. But of course, there's now then 2 months after that meeting until the July 6th statement. We have no idea whether Trump either maybe he already knew what was in there, maybe he had a very private conversation with Todd Blanche or someone else and said, well, what is in there actually? Maybe he just decided it could be very bad based on his own knowledge of what he did, said, what might have been in records from the time and travel and so forth. So, but once the card came out, in this past month, you would have thought Trump. What one might think Trump would have the following thought process, which is, well, this is probably the worst. This is the worst thing in there. It's come out. Everything else is going to be kind of tame by comparison. I get a lot of credit for releasing it. I release it. I take 2 days of bad press on 3 other things that are in there that are kind of awkward and unpleasant, and then it's over. He's got to think there's something in those. He's not releasing it in the files. He's got to think there's something in those files that's very damaging. I think he's going ahead with a cover-up that's very tricky to pull off. I would say, despite Trump's success in the past at evading accountability and responsibility, he's sending Blanche down to see Maxwell, which is certainly, it's inconceivable that Trump didn't either tell Blanche to do it or certainly sign off on Blanche doing it. The idea that this is like Blanche has just decided to go see Maxwell, so childish. But anyway, he's doing this somewhat risky cover-up rather than make what's still in the files and still unrevealed public. That is very telling to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have plenty of evident reasons to suspect there's a lot more in there, on a whole bunch of different people, including Trump. I mean, one of the things that Julie Brown reports in her book, and this is more recent, so I think it's around 2005. She says that the police started working with the sanitation department to scoop up Jeffrey Epstein's garbage, and they found all sorts of stuff in the garbage. Now, we don't know exactly what it is or if it was damning or incriminating, but one of the things she says that they found were messages from famous men like Harvey Weinstein, Donald Trump, and David Copperfield. I mean, how many messages are there, right? How many examples of correspondence between the two are there? I mean, what other kind of stuff is there? I think what I would say is
these notepads, I think, at his Palm Beach villa.
They used to track everything, on these notepads, between each other. So, I mean, who knows what they say? But I think, Bill, there's a key point here, right? Even if everything that's in the Epstein files doesn't line up to criminal or lead to criminal wrongdoing or anything like that, right? And I'm not alleging it does, but even if it doesn't lead to that, right? It's still wrong, right? This is what I'm worried about with our society and where we are, right? You can imagine a time in the past where a major presidential candidate, if 10% of this was known to the public, it would have been disqualifying in the end of that person's candidacy, And now we're finding all this out of the second time that Trump has won the presidency and the third time he's run for the presidency. And to me, the fact that he had this relationship based on all this evidence for so long with a guy who was a super predator, one of the most notorious now sexual predators of the late 20th, early 21st century, is damning in and of itself.
No, I think it's very well said and very true and disturbing about our country in some ways. But what about the cover-up? Where do you think it goes? What strikes you as key possible things? Well, you mentioned already one thing they could try to pull off, I guess. Do you think that we'll ever? Do you think he'll ever release the files? Do you think is it conceivable they'll come out in other ways? We have seen the birthday note. Maybe there are other things that could come out, even if Trump doesn't want them to come out. I don't know. You've followed these kinds of things for quite a while. Where do you think it goes?
I'm not sure, but I think there are multiple other angles to explore here, including stuff that's in the Epstein estate's possession. One of the victim's lawyers has come forward to say that the birthday book is in the estate's possession. They can be subpoenaed to bring it out. That's, I think, telling that there's still evidence outside of the government's possession like that, or, things like that. I think there's plenty of stuff in the files itself that could be released without implicating or giving away the identities of the victims and doing anything else to harm the victims. But, Bill, I think from my perspective, the problem here is that there was never really, yes, there's a lot of investigative work that was done behind the scenes, okay, that we haven't seen, that wasn't used presumably by prosecutors. We can presume that. I still don't see any evidence that a real investigation of this across all international boundaries, even borders, was done to really expose everything that happened here, and that's the problem. Like there's an investigative problem here that's essential, which is that if you were really going to look into all this, if you were really going to put it all together, there's all sorts of pools of information and evidence you would put together into one pool and then see where it goes and see what matters. And that just hasn't been done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of just as you said this, I was thinking more about the fact that they did this big, we went through the files. They didn't do any independent, of course, we know, investigating in the February, March, April period. And instead, the normal thing you do after, I would think, after you go through files and is you say, well, look, we did, well, no, either everything's fine, which is hard to believe. If it is, they would have to explain that, I think. They assert there's no reason to think anyone else should be charged. But again, that's even not the question exactly about being charged, right? It's also about knowing more about what happened. But anyway, they assert that, but then I just hard to believe they weren't like, it wouldn't, I'm sort of surprised they didn't say, you know what, we're following up on a bunch of things. It'll take us a while, very discreet, these things have to be done confidentially and legal investigation. Can't really talk about it. That would have actually bought them time, and quite a lot of time, honestly. I'm worried and you and I were talking about this earlier, I'm worried they're going to do this now, right? I mean, the Maxwell is going to give information to Blanche, which lets Blanche come back. Oh, we've got some very useful information. And we're going to have to look into all these things. But we can't talk about any of it, of course, because it's a prosecutorial matter and it's blah, 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 and we can't endanger anything. So the cover up at that point, Maxwell becomes an excuse for continuing a cover up. Maybe there's a bit of a fake semi-investigation of some people. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. Do you think that?
I think it's very plausible. I mean, look, what we know from press reporting and from Maxwell's attorney is that they met for a whole day on a Thursday and then a half day on Friday. And he claimed, her attorney, that she discussed 100 names and was forthright in providing testimony on these people. I mean, what I want to be very careful here is there are things she could have said in that actually were true, right? But does anybody think that she was fully forthcoming or that she was actually going to give you the full truth or was going to actually provide all the damning information that she has in her head that she knows about? I think the record is clear that she would not do that. And the other thing is she's going to provide a very tilted or slanted view of things because she wants a pardon. So she's not going to, a lot of the most damning stuff is going to involve her. She's not going to implicate herself, although she was given partial use immunity, but she's not going to give, based on everything we've seen about her and the way she's behaved during the court proceedings and then even from behind bars, she's not going to do anything to fully implicate herself and fully implicate a lot of what happened here. Fully explain that. So I think everything that she says has to be taken with, looked at very suspiciously. And I think that what you just mentioned could be exactly the play, right? To say there's stuff here we have to look at. But why did it have to go to Ghislaine Maxwell for that? They should know that from the files. They should know that from all the evidence that have been procured already, right? There should have been enough to say there's more of an ongoing investigation. But one other point here, Bill, real quick. That's the point when we talked about the outset about the Larry Nassar case and the Catholic Church case and so many other cases, right? Even in those contexts, when you don't have a president looming over a case like we do here, the FBI and DOJ failed, right? They didn't do everything they should have done to really bring. And so I don't fully trust the prosecutorial decisions in matters when you don't have a president looming over them, and I don't trust it here when you do have a president looming over them.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I think, I've compared it to Watergate a little bit. This scandal, it could unravel. The huge advantage Trump has is he controls everything. There's no special counsel. There's no independent Justice Department. Elliot Richardson authorized a serious investigation. He appointed Cox as special counsel. Nixon fired Richardson and Cox. Bob Bork took over. He appointed Leon Jaworski. There were court cases, criminal cases before Sirica, which started to bring out evidence. There's a Senate investigative committee. Some people involved in the cover-up, John Dean, decide they won't do it and testify to that. And then eventually there are the tapes from the Oval Office. None of that seems to exist or exist so far, at least in terms of someone flipping in this case. And I think the degree, and same with Iran-Contra, the Clinton case, they all had, in those cases, sort of special counsels of one sort or another, and also somewhat independent justice departments where there was a respect for, we're so far beyond that. There's not even a pretense of that. Bondi coming into the Oval and telling Trump he's in the files by old standards is wrong. You're not supposed to tell someone who might be subject to investigation. There would be recusals. There would be this. Bondi Blanche would be recused. Bondi, and the whole thing is so far beyond anything we've seen, including in the first term, where Sessions did recuse himself.
Yep.
Rosenstein appointed Mueller, and for all of the threats against Mueller, and for all that Barr did to obfuscate the truth, nonetheless, an actual report was issued in the Trump administration of something that was investigated seriously by a special counsel with pretty damning evidence about Trump. Honestly, maybe people decided it wasn't enough to impeach and convict, obviously, and it wasn't quite a crime. Mueller wasn't certain that it was a crime, but you can't even imagine that in this. So controlling all of government makes cover-ups easier, presumably. And
Well,
so that's what worries me. On the other hand, cover-ups are kind of difficult. There are a lot of loose threads. There are many people in the agency, in the Department of Justice, rather, and in the Bureau who maybe would be comfortable having seen some of this evidence with their superiors lying about it. I mean, one just doesn't know.
listen, Trump gave a speech earlier this year. It was one of the most shocking speeches by a president in the Department of Justice context ever given, if not the most shocking, where at the DOJ, he said, I am the nation's chief law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
No, he isn't. He's the president of the United States. This ethical wall that had existed between since Watergate, between the White House and Department of Justice is gone. It's totally gone. And that's what I'm saying here. This isn't anymore, to my mind, about criminal prosecutorial liability or criminal investigation. This is about now the morality of the American people and our society and where we are. Because if I don't have any faith that any form of justice can be, take Trump out of it for a second. There are other people, just from reading up on this, there are other people that, to my mind, are almost certainly guilty of criminal activity that should be charged, right? Other people who worked with Ghislaine Maxwell, who worked for Jeffrey Epstein, who were recruiters, who were networkers, who were people who delivered victims to this massive sexual predator's arms, right? It strains credulity to me to think that there's no evidence to charge these people, right? And in fact, I think it can. And the point is, there was a failure there. This is to me is gone from the prosecutorial realm. That's not the issue for me. The issue now is whether or not we have any kind of base morality anymore at all, because we may not, right? It may be gone now. It may be that all this doesn't matter, and we're living in such a broken reality that all this stuff flings around. I mean, think about the people. I was preparing for the show today, Bill. I just started writing down a list of all the different names and people who have talked about this as credible witnesses about Trump and Epstein and other things. Does that matter at this point for many Americans? I don't know. I mean, it matters to me, but I know it matters to you, but I just don't know anymore.
Yeah, it would be as if, to take the Catholic Church, maybe you could enter this scandal, which you mentioned, and I'm not an expert on it, and it's I don't want to make any assertions that aren't based on fact, but at some point the pressure got enough that they did their own investigating, or others did investigating that they couldn't deny the truth of, and people did get very belatedly and maybe not nearly sternly enough disciplined, removed, exposed, basically disgraced even, and a lot of people actually, including some very, very high up and well known. That has not happened, right? And that's what strikes me. I mean, this is in this case, right? Some names are thrown out, the Prince Andrew kind of thing. There's some settlements, there's some civil suits, which incidentally the victims and the people on the victim side have won almost all of them, right? Whether it's against Maxwell or others. So when it gets to court, the evidence seems to be on the side of, as it obviously is, honestly, of the victims, not on Maxwell or Epstein's. But I mean, will there be some accountability and some clarity just about the scope of this thing? As I guess we finally got to, too late for a lot of the victims, obviously, in the case of the church or in the case of Nasser and so forth.
In the case of the church, I just would say, from my own experience and from reading up on things, there was never the type of accountability there should have been. There was it was, like you said, it was very belated, and the Catholic Church has admitted all sorts of priests were engaged in this activity. They have public websites. And in fact, I went a long time ago and found the name of one of the chief priests at my church growing up as a kid and going to school on that list as somebody who was the Catholic Church does not dispute that he was a sexual predator and a pedophile. And there's a lot more to that story. But the bottom line is that I think that for the victim's sake, this is the story here that's really disheartening, is that the victims are not going to get the type of accountability they deserve. This is a major problem going forward. And it starts with some sort of moral accountability to me. Are we still, and political accountability too? Like, are we going to still go through a world in which this doesn't matter? And just at the end of the day, it's going to be swept under the rug, or we're going to pretend like it's the deep state, or we're going to pretend like, it's just a partisan thing, or is there any actual moral accountability anymore? And I'm afraid what the answer is.
Well, I'm worried about too, but it partly begins on describing what happened accurately and not making it seem like, this is all conspiracy theory and now it's come back to light. But it's not really. I've been in so many conversations with people who are good people. I mean, well-meaning people, would deplore all the things they should deplore, but somehow they don't really. This is just one instance of, Trump shouldn't be president, or Trump shouldn't have won, or Trump is a bad guy. And I feel there's a certain lack of willingness, I think, to really look this in the eye. And I guess they're just it exposes too much about us and about our elites, honestly.
He hobnobbed with Democrats and Republicans alike. He was a big donor of Democrats. This guy who Jeffrey Epstein hobnobbed with people for a long, long time and bought influence. Even after he took that limited plea deal, which was scandalous, he bought off influence to reclaim his public standing even after that. Giving to charity.
And also the whole he resumes. I take it the sex ring. I mean, the Virgin Islands stuff is later, right? I mean, that's what he does after the plea deal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I mean, who knows what he was doing? Actually, even when he was in that arrangement where he served like 13 months in some sort of really minimal sort of prison where he had work release for much of the day and much of the week. I mean, who knows what he's even doing during all that time? I mean, that's the point though, is that this guy should have been found out and brought to light much, much sooner. And it says something about our society that he wasn't. And that's not a conspiracy theory.
And others who were part of the ring, either as knowing participants and clients, or as facilitators. None. And there's some names have leaked out, of course, but no one really brought to light in a serious way.
Yeah, I mean, without wanting to induce any liability, I can name 5 or 6 people who I think are almost certainly guilty of crimes, like I said, who were helping Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And they were never charged. And in fact, there was the part of the scandal around the deal he originally got in Florida was this immunity for some of his accomplices, which was totally ludicrous. I mean, it was a ridiculous sort of setup here. But that says something about how many the people that were actually helping him,
And to let him get going again after Trump and say, it's sort of like, I can get you immunity, and sort of like with Trump's pardons, right? And
let him get going again. One other thing too about this, when you get in the Epstein affair, there's so many layers to it that are disturbing. One of the final layers to it that's disturbing is how he uses resources to hunt down the victims and intimidate them and terrify them, and that's part of the whole rich and powerful abusing their power for their own nefarious purposes. That isn't a conspiracy theory, right? This is something that happened where he hired private investigators. He hired people to stalk his own victims to get them to shut up, and their family members and others, and that's part of why we need, if there's going to be any hope for the future, we need a new way of investigating these types of issues and protecting victims and making sure that these types of people can't abuse their power to basically keep inflicting trauma on people years afterwards.
And that's why this is, finally, just if you agree with this, I think a very important inflection point. That is, if we fail in this case to have anything like, now we can't control what Trump does, I suppose, and what, obviously Blanche and Bondi and Patel do and so forth. But if we fail as a country, really, to at least insist on what accountability we can, and to make Trump pay at least the political price if we can't make him, if there's no way to get more of the information out, I think that's a terrible thing. I mean, I just tweeted this on Blue Sky. I think that it occurred to me. I mean, there were so many things that Trump has done, many of them morally truly reprehensible, obviously, and not related to Epstein. That one thinks, okay, this is just another one. But I don't think that's the right way to think about it. It is another one. It seems worse than almost all the others. But anyway, it's the one we have. It's the one that's facing us. And you can't, sort of like some guy is, compared to murder, but let's just do this from a sort of, TV show point of view. Someone's committed 4 murders. You can't prove it, and maybe you don't know about it even. When he commits the 5th and you have some evidence, you have an obligation to discover the truth and prosecute if possible. And maybe you find out more about the earlier ones. Maybe you don't, incidentally, but you still have the obligation. The fact that this has been going on for a while, that he's been getting away with this for so long, people tell me that, what are you focused on this for? That's ridiculous, in my opinion. McCarthy got away with a lot of demagoguery and defaming of people, hurting people's careers for Joe McCarthy for about 5 years. And then Robert Welch confronted him. And that turned out to be the thing that brought him down, which no one particularly predicted that this was going to be the key hearing necessarily. Maybe some people did. I don't know the history that well, but I don't think so. He defamed a lot of very famous people and got away with it. And then he defames basically a young man who no one's ever heard of. And that allows Welch to have this retort on national television, have no sense of decency. After all this, have no sense of decency. I mean, you don't know what's going to be the, to bring him down, but you can't not do your best to bring out the truth, because other efforts to bring out the truth haven't quite worked.
I'm always suspicious when I hear anybody say they don't want to fight for the truth, right? Or they don't want to fight for things. When I hear that, there's some sort of weird political calculation, or they've given up, or whatever their reasoning is. And the point here is that his own base, Trump's own base, said that Jeffrey Epstein was a bridge too far. There's a type of person who they focused on as saying should be beyond the pale. And that's right. He should be. He should have been somebody who was brought out to light earlier. This is now testing again the elasticity of his own base. Do they not have any common decency, right? Because they've said that Jeffrey Epstein, and again, you don't have to believe that Donald Trump did anything criminal to say that the evidence that's on the table that comes from good sources, right, is damning, right? That this guy had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, this monstrous sexual predator from the late 1980s to 2005 that we know of. And the nature of that relationship, those details are bad.
And there's, quote, unverified evidence or assertions in the files, and let's judge them, right? And if they're unverified, then they're just unverified.
And not just on him, but anybody, any Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter who, doesn't matter.
Tom, thank you for taking the time today, and I really thank you, really honestly, for doing all the research and investigating you've been doing, because this isn't necessarily. There are plenty of other things you could be working on. You're an expert on foreign policy and the Middle East, and you could be doing Iran and all. But this is important, I think, and I'm appreciative that you spent so much time on it and willing to take the time today. So,
no, thank you, Bill. I mean, listen, it matters because our country's on the line here, and I think this is an issue that shows how it's on the line.
Yeah, well said. Tom, thank you for joining us today on Bulwark on Sunday, and thank you all for joining us.